Imagine building a life of success, loyalty, and trust, only to have it shattered in an instant. One forgotten item, one unexpected return home. And in that moment, I discovered the truth. My wife and my best friend had been betraying me all along. They thought I would walk away in silence. They were wrong. What followed wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. And by the time I was done, they lost everything. Lucas Reed had spent years constructing a life that, to anyone looking in from the outside, seemed unbreakable. A thriving career in the boxing world, a reputation built through discipline and hard work, and a marriage that, despite its imperfections, appeared stable. He had no reason to question any of it, until the moment he walked through his own front door and discovered how fragile it all truly was. That morning had been like any other. His suitcase was packed with precision, every item carefully checked off the mental list he had built through years of frequent travel. His flight was still hours away, giving him ample time to reach the airport without rushing. Emma had stood near the doorway, her expression warm as he prepared to leave. She had wished him a safe trip, told him not to forget to call when he landed. The usual routine, one they had repeated countless times. The drive to the airport had been smooth, the traffic unusually light. But just as he was about to park, the realization struck. His phone charger still sat on the nightstand at home. A week without it wasn't an option, and with time to spare, there was no reason not to turn back. The house was just as he had left it, quiet and undisturbed. Yet, as he stepped inside, something felt different. The air carried a charge of something unspoken. Then, a sound drifted from upstairs. A hushed laugh, low voices blending in quiet conversation. His steps slowed, each one heavier than the last as he moved toward the stairs. The voices became clearer, no longer just sounds but unmistakable words exchanged in a tone far too intimate. A name reached his ears, Nathan, his trainer, his so-called friend. The bedroom door stood ajar, revealing glimpses of movement inside. His presence remained unnoticed as he took in the scene. Emma, sprawled across the bed, her body language familiar yet foreign in this context. Nathan beside her, a casual ease in his posture that spoke of a comfort he had no right to claim. The world around Lucas shifted in an instant. The air thickened, every muscle in his body coiling with the force of betrayal. The anger rose fast, too consuming to be ignored. Before Nathan had time to react, Lucas's fist connected with his jaw, sending him backward. The impact barely dulled the rage surging inside him, but it was a start. Emma's voice broke through the haze, filled with panic, but none of it mattered. The damage was already done, carved into the foundation of what had once been his life. Without a word, he pulled his phone from his pocket, raising it steadily. The lens captured everything. The guilt painted across their faces, the silent admission of their actions. The phone lowered as quickly as it had been lifted. His movements were mechanical as he stepped back, exiting the room. A chair dragged across the floor, wedged beneath the doorknob, sealing them inside. The sounds of protest barely registered. His hands shook as he reached for his phone again, but this time for a different reason. One number dialed. A familiar voice answered, laced with confusion. The urgency in Lucas's tone left no room for questions. Emma's parents needed to come over immediately. Another call, shorter this time. Sophia, Nathan's wife, needed to be here. The waiting stretched unbearably. Upstairs, voices rose and fell, arguments unraveling behind a closed door. Let them talk. Let them scramble for explanations that wouldn't matter. The truth was already out. Minutes dragged into 20. Then, at last, a knock at the door. Emma's parents stood on the doorstep, their faces creased with concern. Sophia arrived moments later, uncertainty in her expression. Lucas didn't offer explanations. He simply led them upstairs, allowing the situation to speak for itself. The door opened. The reaction was immediate. Emma's mother recoiled, disbelief clouding her features. Her father, normally a composed man, turned rigid with barely contained fury. Sophia, silent for a long moment, took in the scene with an unreadable expression before finally stepping back, distancing herself from Nathan as if his presence alone had become unbearable. Words were spoken, accusations thrown. Emma stumbled through justifications, her voice cracking under the weight of her own betrayal. Nathan attempted to reason, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. None of it mattered. The decision was already made. Lucas stood firm, his voice even as he issued the only command that mattered. They needed to leave. Emma hesitated. The weight of finality settled between them, her gaze searching his for something that no longer existed. Lucas didn't waver. With no other option, they gathered their things. Each movement slow, dragging out the inevitable. As they stepped through the door, the reality of what had unfolded set in. The life they had destroyed wasn't just his, it was theirs too. The house fell into silence. Emma's parents lingered, offering words of support, though none could repair what had been broken. Sophia stood by the doorway, quiet in her devastation. Lucas exhaled slowly, the chaos settling into something colder. Resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lucas Reed had anticipated the silence after the confrontation, assuming that shame and guilt would keep Emma and Nathan in the shadows. Instead, their response came swiftly, not in apologies or attempts at reconciliation, but in a calculated strike designed to dismantle everything he had left. At first, the signs were subtle. Cryptic messages on social media, vague references to being wrongfully judged, quiet attempts to paint themselves as victims rather than betrayers. He ignored it, unwilling to dignify their pathetic attempt at damage control. But the situation escalated faster than expected. The first Real hit came when he saw his name trending online. Clicking on the news, his stomach twisted. Intimate photos, private moments meant for no one else's eyes, were now circulating publicly. Worse still, alongside them were confidential business documents, details about contracts, financial records, and negotiations that should have remained classified. The attack was deliberate, precise. They hadn't just tried to humiliate him personally. They had gone after his career, his reputation, his future. Minutes later, Ethan stormed into his office, frustration evident in his stiff posture, as he placed a stack of printed articles on the desk. The damage was undeniable. Investors were backing out, clients reconsidering their partnerships. The carefully maintained image Lucas had built over the years was now at risk of unraveling. Every instinct told him that Emma was behind this. The access, the timing, it all pointed to her. Nathan, lacking the intelligence for such a maneuver, had likely followed her lead. Lucas knew the response had to be immediate. He contacted his legal team, who quickly traced the leaked documents back to Emma's accounts. Lawsuits were filed, one for defamation, another for invasion of privacy. But he knew that legal action alone wouldn't be enough. They hadn't just attacked his career. They had challenged his very ability to fight back. As he sat in his office, the pieces of a different kind of retaliation began to take shape. The boxing world thrived on spectacle, and if they wanted a public war, he would give them one. He had spent years cultivating relationships in the industry, understanding how to manipulate attention, how to control narratives. He wouldn't just clear his name. He would make sure Nathan's was permanently buried under the weight of his own downfall. The setup was simple. A major boxing event was already on the horizon, a televised match that would attract massive viewership. Pulling a few strings, Lucas ensured that Nathan's name was thrown into the mix. An opportunity for redemption, a chance to prove himself in front of the same audience that now saw him as nothing more than a disgraced trainer. He knew Nathan's arrogance wouldn't let him decline. That evening, Lucas returned to the gym, his mind already focused on the fight ahead. The scent of sweat and leather filled the air, the rhythmic pounding of fists against punching bags creating a familiar backdrop. Daniel observed him from across the room, assessing the way he moved, the tension in his stance. No words were exchanged, but an understanding passed between them. Training intensified over the next few days. Every punch carried the weight of betrayal. Every sparring session sharpened his focus. There was no room for hesitation. Nathan had made his move, and now it was Lucas's turn to respond. Late one night, after another grueling session, Lucas sat alone in his office, scrolling through his phone. A message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. Enjoying the attention? This is just the beginning. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The fight hadn't even begun, yet his opponents were already nervous enough to issue threats. They had no idea what was coming. Lucas Reed had always understood that the boxing world wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about strategy. A fight wasn't won in the first round. It was won through patience, through knowing when to strike. His personal battle with Emma and Nathan followed the same principle. He had watched them make their desperate moves, lashing out in an attempt to weaken him. Now it was his turn. The fight was set. Nathan, too arrogant to see the trap laid before him, had accepted the challenge without hesitation. The upcoming event was already drawing attention, but now, with the added narrative of betrayal and revenge, it was turning into something far bigger. In the days leading up to it, Lucas worked behind the scenes, ensuring that when the moment came, the impact would be irreversible. The industry thrived on exposure, and he had connections with the right people: journalists, promoters, event organizers. Conversations were had, stories subtly leaked, narratives shaped. By the time fight night arrived, everyone knew what was at stake. Inside the arena, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The audience wasn't just there for a fight. They were there for a reckoning. Screens flashed promotional footage, but nothing about the usual technical breakdowns or career highlights. Instead, they displayed carefully edited sequences. Nathan's name alongside headlines about the scandal, photos of him and Emma in the aftermath of their betrayal, a carefully orchestrated reminder of why the crowd was truly there. Lucas sat in the locker room, hands wrapped, muscles loose and ready. He had trained for this moment, but the real satisfaction came not from the physical challenge ahead, but from knowing that the damage he was about to inflict would extend far beyond the ring. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena, calling the fighters to the ring. Stepping out, Lucas felt the weight of thousands of eyes on him, the energy of the crowd feeding into his own focus. Across from him, Nathan tried to maintain a front of confidence, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. He had spent years training others to fight, but he had never been tested under these conditions. The referee signaled for the match to begin. The first few moments were cautious, each testing the other's movements. Nathan threw quick jabs, seeking an opening that wasn't there. Lucas countered with precision, his strikes calculated, designed to wear his opponent down. He wasn't fighting just to win. He was fighting to humiliate, to expose every weakness Nathan had tried to hide. By the second round, the cracks began to show. Nathan's breathing grew heavier, his punches sloppier. Lucas could see it, the creeping realization settling into his opponent's expression that he was out of his depth. The crowd fed off the tension, their cheers growing louder with each passing second. Lucas pushed forward, driving Nathan further into exhaustion, controlling the rhythm of the fight. Every punch landed with purpose, each one stripping away another layer of Nathan's crumbling facade. Then the final moment came. An opening presented itself, a split-second lapse in Nathan's defense. Lucas didn't hesitate. His fist connected with precision, sending Nathan crashing to the mat. The referee began the count, but it was clear from the way Nathan struggled to rise that the fight was already over. The moment the knockout was confirmed, the arena erupted. The cameras captured every detail: the defeat, the humiliation, the undeniable statement that had just been made. As Lucas stood in the center of the ring, victorious, he knew this was only the beginning. The physical fight had ended, but the real damage had just begun. Lucas Reed had never sought out vengeance in his life before. In the boxing ring, he had always believed in discipline, in fair fights, in letting skill dictate the outcome. But this wasn't just a fight. This was something far deeper. This was a statement, one that Nathan would never forget. The night of the match had been electric, every moment leading up to that final devastating blow meticulously planned. The knockout wasn't just a victory. It was an execution of everything Nathan had tried to take from him. And yet, Lucas knew the damage inflicted inside the ring was only part of the war. The fallout began immediately. The media wasted no time, plastering Nathan's defeat across every sports network, every social platform. The once cocky trainer was now nothing more than a cautionary tale. A man who had lost everything, both inside and outside the ring. Clips of the knockout replayed endlessly, slow-motion replays capturing the exact moment his confidence shattered. But the true blow came not from fists, but from the aftermath. Within hours of the fight, the industry turned its back on Nathan. Sponsors pulled out. Gym owners distanced themselves. Potential clients, once eager for his expertise, suddenly disappeared. His reputation, once built on the illusion of strength and knowledge, crumbled under the weight of public humiliation. Lucas watched it unfold from a distance, detached but satisfied. He had expected Nathan to disappear quietly, to accept the loss and fade into irrelevance. Instead, he tried to fight back, not in the ring but in the court of public opinion. Desperation took over. He attempted to spin the narrative, painting himself as the victim. Claims surfaced. Accusations that Lucas had used his influence to manipulate the fight, that the entire event had been rigged against him. A feeble attempt at salvaging what little dignity he had left. Lucas had anticipated this. Before Nathan's story could gain traction, Lucas's legal team struck first. Evidence was released, undeniable proof that Nathan had, in fact, attempted to cheat. Investigators uncovered last-minute efforts to tamper with equipment, attempts to ensure an unfair advantage that had failed. The governing body overseeing the event launched an inquiry, one that concluded with Nathan's official suspension from coaching and competition. He had not only lost the fight, he had lost the right to step into the industry ever again. Meanwhile, Emma found herself caught in the collapse. The public humiliation of her involvement with Nathan followed her relentlessly. Every attempt to distance herself from him failed. She had tied her fate to a sinking ship, and there was no escape. The backlash intensified, affecting even her career. The life she had once taken for granted slipped further out of reach. Lucas never reached out to her. He didn't need to. Her silence, her absence from any further attempts to repair the damage, told him everything he needed to know. She had realized the truth. There was no coming back from this. And for Lucas, that was enough. As the dust settled, he found himself at peace in a way he hadn't expected. Revenge had never been the goal. It had simply been the means to an end. He had reclaimed his name, his dignity, and his future. For the first time in months, he felt free. With the storm behind him, Lucas Reed stood at the edge of a future he had once thought lost. The months of betrayal, revenge, and calculated destruction had reshaped him into someone he barely recognized. A man who had not only survived the worst but had emerged stronger, untouchable. The scandal had long since died down, leaving in its wake the wreckage of those who had tried to bring him down. Nathan had disappeared from the boxing world entirely, his name now synonymous with disgrace. The industry had erased him, gym doors once open now permanently closed. His attempts at finding another path had failed spectacularly, each new opportunity overshadowed by the very public memory of his downfall. Emma had fared no better. Once a woman who thrived on attention, she now shrank under its weight. Her efforts to move on, to salvage her life from the wreckage, had fallen apart piece by piece. Employers turned away, friendships dissolved, and any attempt at rebuilding a social image was met with nothing but reminders of her choices. She had gambled everything and lost. Lucas never saw either of them again. He never had to. Their absence was confirmation enough of his victory. Yet, despite everything, he wasn't consumed by the past. There was no lingering resentment, no desire to revisit old wounds. He had already won the only battle that mattered. He had taken back control of his life. His career flourished, stronger than before. The boxing promotion business he had once considered just another venture became his primary focus. New fighters sought him out, drawn by his name, his reputation, and the story that had now become legend. He trained them not just for physical endurance, but for something greater, the ability to stand unshaken in the face of adversity. Sophia, too, had carved a new path for herself. The divorce had freed her from a life built on lies, and in its place, she found a renewed sense of purpose. She worked alongside Lucas now, managing operations, ensuring that every detail ran smoothly. Together, they built something far greater than either had imagined. One evening, as Lucas sat in his office overlooking the city, a familiar sense of clarity settled over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was nothing to fight against, no enemies, no ghosts from the past. Just the steady pulse of possibility. He had been broken once, betrayed in the cruelest way. But that wasn't his legacy. His story wasn't one of loss. It was one of resilience. As he closed his office for the night, stepping into the quiet hum of the city, he realized something simple yet profound. He wasn't looking back anymore. The past was over. The future was his. And for Lucas Reed, that was the greatest victory of all.